At my birthday dinner, my mother-in-law leaned in and whispered something to my husband, and I saw the shift in his expression. Before I could react, his slap knocked me off balance, and onto the hardwood floor. Stunned, I stayed down as he turned away, until a low laugh bubbled up from my throat. He froze. His face lost all color. The email still glowed on my laptop like a sealed confession. The Whitmore estate disbursement is contingent on continuous marriage of at least 5 years, with no filed separations. My hand trembled as I forwarded it to my encrypted server, the final piece sliding into place. Behind me, the pale Seattle morning pushed through sheer custom curtains Margot had insisted on. Curtains that cost more than my college car. I snapped the laptop shut just as the bathroom door opened, steam curling around Ethan as he emerged, towel around his hips. His body, still sculpted at 39, didn't distract from the increasingly vacant look in his eyes, a look I'd been documenting for months. "Happy birthday, Claire," he said, tone flat. "Practiced." He leaned in for a kiss, but his lips were cooler than the shower's steam. "Mother's excited about tonight. Before we begin, I want to thank each of you for joining this journey. If you're enjoying these stories of justice, subscribe, it's free and helps us grow this community. Let's continue." "I'm sure she is," I thought, but answered with warmth I'd mastered in courtrooms. "So thoughtful of Margot to organize everything," I said, voice as smooth as always, hiding the chill inside me. "What are you working on?" Ethan asked, nodding at my closed laptop. "Just reviewing the Hampton merger files," I lied. "Even birthday girls don't get days off at Miller and Finch." He nodded, no suspicion. 6 years ago he would have teased me, coaxed me back to bed. That version of Ethan was long gone, replaced by this polished puppet responding to his mother's signals like a well-trained dog. As he dressed for the family firm, I slipped into my walk-in closet, the only place in our Queen Anne townhouse untouched by surveillance. Margot had installed it last fall, a thoughtful safety measure for her precious son and his wife. Only I knew about the microscopic devices I found during a sweep 3 months ago. Only I knew they still worked, but only broadcasted loops of mundane footage whenever I needed real privacy. Inside the closet, I pressed my fingertip to a faint seam in the wall. A hidden panel opened, revealing a waterproof case, hard drives, a backup laptop and 3 burner phones. My weapon. For 4 years I'd been the perfect Whitmore wife, Stanford law grad, rising star at a top Seattle firm, board member of family charities, and loving partner to Ethan Whitmore, heir to one of the Northwest's oldest fortunes. Society columns adored us. Margot paraded me like a prize thoroughbred. No one suspected that behind the designer heels and courtroom charm, I was quietly building the case that would destroy the Whitmore dynasty. It started with inconsistencies I caught helping Ethan review documents, numbers that didn't align, dummy corporations in tax havens. Then came the odd meetings. Ethan returned subdued, unfocused, and always after Margot whispered in his ear at family events. His mood would shift like clockwork. I'd spent years defending corporations accused of fraud. I knew financial trickery when I saw. I knew control when I saw that too. The day I found Ethan catatonic, staring at a video his cousin Damien had sent, was the day I fully launched the investigation. That night I bought my first burner phone. I retrieved a micro SD from my hidden stash, and slid it into my encrypted device. Inside, offshore transfers, audio from Whitmore family meetings, discussing response training for Ethan, bribes to regulators, manipulated markets. I scrolled to the newest file, a photo from yesterday. Leonard Hale, Ethan's so-called childhood therapist, entering Margot's Mercer Island estate. The same man referenced as behavioral consultant, paid $30,000 monthly through a Whitmore shell firm. I checked the clock, 7:15 a.m., almost time to become Claire Whitmore again. I replaced everything, sealed the compartment, and selected a conservative navy St. John suit for court. That morning's Kensington hearing would wrap by noon, giving me just enough time to change for my birthday dinner at Margot's prized waterfront venue in Bainbridge Bay. As I applied my makeup, I rehearsed each expression in the mirror: delighted surprise, gracious appreciation, devoted affection, the same ones I'd perfected over the years while quietly building a case against the people who had hollowed out my husband and constructed a criminal empire masked by charity galas and foundation plaques. Ethan appeared in the doorway, custom suit pressed, tie knotted with surgical precision, hair perfectly styled. Once a glimpse of him like this would have stirred something soft in me. Now I catalogued the signs of conditioning: the flatness in his eyes, the slight lag before he responded to stimuli, the clenched set of his jaw. "You look beautiful," he said, like he was reading from a script. Thank you, darling. I reached up and straightened the tie he'd already fastened, eyes searching his face for even a flicker of the man I married. Nothing. I'll see you tonight, he said. Don't let my mother go overboard with the surprises. She just wants everything perfect for you, I replied. Perfect. The Whitmore's favorite word. Perfect family, perfect image, perfect control. As I gathered my briefcase and court materials, my phone buzzed. Margot, wear the blue Valentino tonight. Ethan loves you in that color. Another order disguised as maternal care. I replied with a grateful emoji and nothing more. Then I slipped on the crimson Dior I'd been saving for something bold. Small rebellions kept me sane. In the Uber to the courthouse, I skimmed through my client briefs, shifting into professional mode. Compartmentalization had become second nature. By day I was still Claire Whitmore, corporate defense attorney. My clients needed me sharp. Ironically, the same skills I used to shield corporations from scrutiny had made me lethal in building my case against the Whitmore. At the steps of the courthouse, I paused and checked my secure messenger. My SEC contact had responded to the last data dump. Echo. Got it. Moving forward next week. Need anything more from your source? I smiled as I typed back. One final piece. Coming tonight. What Margot believed to be an exquisitely choreographed birthday celebration would, instead, become the fall of the Whitmore dynasty. That rooftop gathering, surrounded by Seattle's most powerful families, investors and regulators, would be her reckoning. I tucked my phone away and climbed the marble steps with the ease of a woman fully in control, expression serene, posture unshaken. Inside I was counting the minutes. The performance was almost over, the facade was about to crack, and I would be there, camera phone in hand, to record every beautiful catastrophic second. The glass house at Alki Point shimmered like a mirage at the edge of Elliott Bay, its glass and steel frame catching the last streaks of Seattle's coppery dust. Gold and crimson played across the surface, a fitting palette, I thought, for what promised to be a bloodletting disguised as a celebration. The restaurant typically required a 3-month reservation, unless of course your last name was Whitmore. The entire rooftop terrace had been secured. Not a table, not a section, the entire crown of the building. Mrs. Whitmore, welcome. The maitre d' nearly bowed as our black town car pulled up to the private entrance. Mrs. Margot has been asking after you. I'm sure she has, I murmured, sliding my hand onto Ethan's mechanical arm. He'd been silent the entire ride, checking his watch every few minutes, as though synchronizing his role in some unseen script. The elevator glided upward. As it ascended, I centered myself. My crimson Dior dress clung to me like lacquered armor, rich, defiant, deliberate, a visual middle finger to Margot's earlier suggestion to wear blue. Ethan hadn't even noticed. Another symptom of his detachment. The doors opened to a curated dreamscape. Crystal chandeliers, suspended on nearly invisible wires, gave the illusion of stars hovering above the water. White orchids, Margot's signature, bloomed across every table, every ledge, even spiraled around the support column. A crowd of about 50 guests milled about, all exuding the well-trained warmth of apex predators. Happy birthday, a chorus of greetings washed over me, as choreographed as the floral displays, and just as artificial. Then she appeared. Margot Whitmore, in midnight blue Chanel, swept toward me like a well-controlled tide. At 64 her presence remained formidable. Her silver bob gleamed like polished steel beneath the chandeliers, an icon of Pacific Northwest power and poison in equal measure. Darling Claire, she folded me into an airless embrace, her Hermes perfume enveloping me like chloroform. Her lips brushed my cheek and lingered just long enough to whisper, "Blue would have photographed better beside Eve." I wanted to surprise everyone, I replied smoothly, my voice dipped in honey over ice. Her eyes narrowed for a flicker, an actual reaction, then she recovered, linking her arm through mine. "Everyone important is here," she announced, as we began our parade through the glittering crowd. Indeed, the Seattle Police Commissioner, 2 state senators, a federal district judge, 3 university chancellors, faces I'd memorized from the case files, each with some known or suspected tie to the Whitmore machine. None of my law partners were here, not a single friend from Stanford, not even my first mentor from Miller and Finch. The guest list had been sanitized, stripped of anyone who might actually know me, anyone who might notice if something ever happened to the real Claire. Champagne, birthday girl, Damian Whitmore, Ethan's cousin and the family's in-house legal fixer, materialized beside me with 2 flutes. His Harvard-polished voice was as smooth as ever, but tension curled at the corners. "Thank you, Damian," I said, taking the glass but not sipping. "Lovely to see you. Wouldn't miss it." His smile was practiced, but his eyes were somewhere else, darting past me toward the entrance. I followed his gaze. A silver-haired man in an immaculately tailored charcoal suit was being escorted in. Dr. Leonard Hale, Ethan's so-called childhood therapist, the one still drawing $30,000 a month in behavioral consulting fees from a shell company, the man referenced in more than a dozen files, the one who knew exactly how the Whitmore heir had been built like a machine. "Excuse me a moment," I said, my smile never breaking. As I drifted toward the fire, I watched Damien intercept the newcomer, Dr. Leonard Hale, the so-called childhood therapist, whose methods had clearly strayed far beyond anything ethical. The man who still received monthly payments, labeled behavioral maintenance, in the Whitmore's private ledgers. A server passed by with a tray of saffron crab canapés, just enough cover for me to edge closer. "Timeline requires acceleration," Damien was saying, his back to the party. "The trustees won't extend again. Pushing the protocol risks instability," Hale replied, his clinical monotone sharp even under a hush. "The conditioning requires we don't have that luxury anymore. We'll cut in. The contractual obligations are clear. If he's not fully compliant by the disbursement date." They noticed me then. In unison they pivoted, transforming into model guests mid-sentence. "Mrs. Whitmore, happy birthday," Hale said, his handshake dry and brief, his gaze measuring me like a lab subject. "You look radiant." "Thank you, Dr. Hale. Ethan mentioned you might attend." I lied effortlessly. "It's been 15 years, since you worked with him." His smile faltered. "On and off. The Whitmores are more like family than client." "How fortunate for everyone," I replied, watching his pupils dilate ever so slightly. He was nervous. "Good." For the next hour I circulated with precision, smiling, laughing, sipping water disguised as champagne, but behind my polite charm, I tracked every shift in the room's current. Margot floated from group to group like a crowned queen, her laugh just a notch too loud, her eyes constantly flicking in my direction. Each time Ethan approached me, her attention locked in as though observing a chemical reaction in a containment chamber. Ethan himself moved through the party like a soft puppet reciting social pleasantries, but hollow-eyed and barely reactive. Twice I saw Hale observing us from across the room, typing quietly into his phone like a scientist taking field notes. "Wonderful turnout," remarked Judge Dean, one of the Whitmore's longest-standing allies. "Indeed," I replied, smile gracious, though I was surprised none of my colleagues from Miller and Finch could make it. "Exclusive guest list," he said with a chuckle. Margot was specific about keeping things intimate. By intimate he meant controlled. A chill crept up the back of my neck. This wasn't just a party, it was a sealed lab experiment, and I was the variable they feared. As dinner began, Margot orchestrated the seating like a battlefield tactician. Ethan was to my right, her at the head, and Hale planted directly across from me. His gaze never left Ethan and me, his posture too still to be casual. Margot tapped her crystal glass, silencing the room with the authority of royalty. "Before we dine," she said, voice poised and warm on the surface, "a toast to my beloved daughter-in-law." She stood tall and commanding in her midnight Chanel. 5 years ago, Ethan brought home this brilliant, beautiful attorney, and I knew immediately she was something special. Her eyes met mine, frost behind the affection. "Claire has become everything the Whitmore family values: loyal, discreet, and committed to our legacy." Around the table, murmurs of approval. I smiled with controlled warmth, translating her message with ease. "We own you." "To Claire," Margot said, raising her glass. "May this 35th year be transformative." The word hung in the air, both a blessing and a threat. Servers glided in with the first course, oysters arranged in a perfect ceremonial circle. Margot beamed at me again from the head of the table, lifting her glass in a silent toast. I mirrored the gesture, lifting my own flute of untouched champagne. Let the games begin. The main course was served and cleared, replaced by a hush of anticipation. At Margot's nod, the waitstaff rolled out a marble-topped table, centered under the chandeliers, stacked with elegantly wrapped gifts, all part of the performance. "Before dessert," Margot announced, drawing every gaze back to her, "we must honor our birthday girl properly." Guests shifted instinctively, forming a perfect semicircle around the display. Smartphones emerged from clutches and jacket pockets, held with discreet precision. They were ready to film. In previous years the attention might have unnerved me, but not tonight. Tonight I welcomed every lens, because tonight, they wouldn't be recording a celebration, they'd be capturing the start of a reckoning. Ethan guided me to the gift table, his hand pressing lightly against the small of my back. Once that touch had felt intimate, protected. Tonight it felt mechanical, A practiced gesture in a script he didn't know he was performing. Start with this one, Margot instructed, her voice light polished. She handed me a small box, wrapped in signature Tiffany blue. A soft murmur passed through the guests, like a wave of synchronized admiration. I smiled for the cameras and unwrapped it slowly, deliberately. Inside, resting on white satin, was a platinum bracelet encrusted with diamonds. Delicate, exquisite, and unmistakably a beautiful handcuff. It's lovely, I said, holding it up as flashes went off from multiple angles. Ethan, help your wife put it on, Margot said, with that carefully maternal tone. He did as instructed, fastening the clasp around my wrist with precision. The bracelet clicked into place. Another link in their chain. The performance continued, a Hermes handbag, a spa weekend at the Whitmore estate on Orcas Island, a generous donation in my name to the Whitmore Foundation, all meticulously chosen to remind me and everyone watching that I was no longer a person, but a possession. And then, her voice shifted. And now, Margot said, softening her tone with dramatic precision, a very special announcement. She glided forward, her movement so measured it may as well have been choreographed. The sweet, suffocating aroma of her perfume arrived just before she did. Like a serpent announcing its presence with jasmine, the room went still. Every eye fixed on us, Margot, Ethan, and me locked in formation like a stage tableau. Margot's hand settled on Ethan's shoulder, her fingers pressing into precise points I recognized from my research-conditioned physical triggers. Claire has been such a treasure to our family, she began, voice coated in syrupy warmth. Devoted, supportive, the perfect partner to Ethan during these 5 critical years. 5 years. The exact length required by the trust disbursement clause. Her eyes sparkled as she leaned in, her lips brushing close to Ethan's ear. I slid my thumb over the record button inside my clutch. Remember your duty, she whispered, but in the hush of the rooftop, the words carried protect what's ours. I watched it unfold in slow motion. Ethan's pupils contracted to pinpoints. His jaw slackened, then locked. His left hand, always slightly restless, froze. Then the words came, flat, mechanical, a voice I didn't recognize. You've betrayed us. A collective gasp sucked the oxygen from the room. Margot stepped back, triumph flickering in her eyes as she watched her puppet perform. What do you mean, Ethan? I asked, my voice calm, steady, despite the current thrumming beneath my skin. He turned to me like an automaton. We know about the investigation, the files, the SEC. More gasps. Murmurs rippled across the rooftop like aftershocks. Just as I expected, Margot's trap had always been more about theater than truth. She wanted witnesses to my betrayal, a perfectly crafted narrative to discredit me before the federal case could break. But what I hadn't accounted for was what came next. Ethan's arm moved with terrifying speed. The sound of the slap cracked across the rooftop like a gunshot. The force of it sent me stumbling sideways, crashing into the marble gift table. I tasted blood. The floor was cool against my cheek. For 3 full echoing seconds, no one moved. Seattle's elite stood frozen, smartphones still raised, every screen still recording. Then from somewhere deep in my chest, something strange happened. I laughed, a soft chuckle at first, then louder, richer, a sound full of disbelief and liberation. It rang across the rooftop like a bell in a cathedral. I sat up slowly, blood dripping from the corner of my mouth onto the crimson DR. I dabbed my lip with a linen napkin and looked Margot square in the eye. Perfect timing, Margot, I said. My voice was crystal, loud, controlled. You really couldn't have scripted it better. Her expression faltered, the rhythm broke. This wasn't part of her plan. Ethan's arm moved with shocking speed. The sound of the slap cracked across the rooftop like a gunshot, followed by an eerie, absolute silence. The impact knocked me sideways into the marble gift table. I tasted copper as my lips split open. The chill of the stone floor pressed against my cheek while the sting bloomed hot across my skin. For 3 long heartbeats, no one moved. Seattle's elite stood frozen, their curated expressions collapsing in real time. The perfect Whitmore image had just fractured in front of 50 raised phones. Then Margot opened her mouth, gearing up to take control of the narrative, to twist the moment into something palatable. Poor Ethan, she'd say, driven to the edge by his ungrateful, scheming wife. But something unexpected happened. I laughed. It started small. A soft, involuntary sound from deep in my chest. Then it grew, louder, brighter, clearer, rising across the stunned rooftop like shattering glass. I sat up slowly, blood smeared across the crimson DR, and kept laughing. Not hysterically, not manically, but with perfect clarity, like someone who'd just watched the final piece fall into place. Perfect timing, Margot, I said, voice carrying through the rooftop like a courtroom closing argument. You honestly couldn't have scripted it better if you tried. Her mask slipped for the first time all evening. Confusion crept into her immaculately Botoxed features. This wasn't in the scenario. The wife was supposed to cry, maybe threaten, maybe be gently removed by security, never laugh. Ethan, help your wife up, she snapped, trying to redirect the scene. She's clearly unwell. But Ethan didn't move. He stood still, staring at his own hand like it belonged to someone else. His eyes were wide. His breath shallow. What did I just, he whispered. The vacant look was receding. I pushed myself to my feet without assistance. Dabbed at my lip with a white linen napkin. The blood bloomed across the fabric like a Japanese watercolor. I turned to the guests, still frozen, still filming. You should check your phones, I said calmly. What you just witnessed was a perfect live demonstration of the Whitmore conditioning program. Murmurs rose. Several guests glanced at their screens. Others kept filming. The very same program I've spent the last 5 years documenting, I continued. Behavioral triggers, emotional override conditioning, generational manipulation for the sake of money and power. I turned to Margot, relishing her slow unraveling. 5 years, Margot. That was the requirement, wasn't it? For Ethan to access his grandfather's trust, a stable marriage, 5 years of appearances. I smiled, my lips still bleeding, my eyes bright. But an assault, in front of witnesses, that tends to complicate divorce proceedings, doesn't it? She stared at me, eyes suddenly hollow. You did this deliberately, she hissed. You provoked us. I didn't have to, I replied. You did the programming. All I had to do was wait and document. I gestured to the dozens of glowing screens and recording smartphones. Now so has everyone else. Every puzzle piece, the fraud, the psychological abuse, the curated control had just been validated by their own choreography. And just so we're clear, I added, my voice conversational, my phone is currently sending data packets to the FBI, SEC and the Seattle Chronicle. I turned my gaze to Dr. Leonard Hale, now pale as ash, including evidence of how you, doctor, helped condition Ethan to respond to specific verbal and physical triggers. He opened his mouth but no words came. The physical response programming was particularly effective, I said. Wouldn't you agree? Then it happened. The first chime of a breaking news alert. Then another. And another. The ripple moved through the crowd like an incoming wave. My dead man switch had activated the moment the phone registered a force consistent with physical assault. Everything: files, voice recordings, financial documents, session notes, transfer ledgers, shell company networks, was now in the hands of federal agencies, investigative journalists, and a few key allies. Margot's empire wasn't just cracking, it was imploding, and I was standing in the middle of it, blood on my lip and triumph in my lungs. You can't possibly, Margot began, but stopped. Her own phone buzzed with the same alert. Her hand trembled as she read the headline. Ethan meanwhile stood in place, trembling. He stared down at the hand that had struck me as though it had betrayed him. His voice came quiet, unfiltered, human. Claire, I didn't mean to. I don't know why the programming was cracking, and Ethan Whitmore was surfacing. I know you didn't, I said softly, addressing Ethan directly, for the first time in months. That's exactly my point. Then I turned to the stunned audience. Seattle's elite, CEOs, state officials, judges, tech philanthropists, stood frozen under the soft chandelier glow. For years these people had been Margot Whitmore's sword and shield, gatekeeping her power, benefiting from her influence. The blood on my lip gave me strange authority. Raw, human, undeniable. For those of you checking your phones, I said, my courtroom voice slicing through the silence. Yes, that alert is about the Whitmore family. A ripple of motion, screens lit up in palm. What you've just witnessed, I continued, is the culmination of a 5-year investigation into one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in the Pacific Northwest. I saw it land. Judge Franklin Dean's face went ashy. Senator Wallace Grant was already backing toward the exit, his hand clutching his wife's shoulder. I met the eyes of each powerful figure one by one, ensuring they understood their complicity was also documented. The Whitmore Foundation, I said, steady and calm, has laundered approximately $340 million through its so-called educational initiatives, funds diverted to offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Singapore. Margot's composure finally cracked. Her perfectly manicured hand fluttered to her throat, where a diamond necklace trembled against her skin. You have no proof, she spat. But her eyes darted toward Dr. Leonard Hale, who had begun to inch backward through the gathering. Hale, I called out, catching him mid-step. Perhaps you'd care to explain the meaning of Project Sentinel. The name hit the room like a grenade. The behavioral modification program you've been running on Ethan since he was 12, I continued, designed to ensure total compliance with family directives. Or perhaps you'd prefer we read from your own notes. Hale froze. His clinical detachment vanished. 50 pairs of eyes pinned him in place. That's privileged therapeutic information, he stammered, retreating behind professional jargon like a crumbling wall. Therapeutic? I echoed, arching a brow. Is that what you call conditioning a child to obey verbal and physical triggers? Programming responses that override his conscious will? I gestured toward Ethan, who now sat in a chair, head in his hands, crumbling under the weight of the memories. Would you also care to explain the $30,000 in monthly payments labeled behavioral maintenance in the Whitmore ledger? No reply. I turned back to the crowd, voice rising not in anger but command. The tone I'd used to eviscerate executives on the stand. The evidence packet now in the hands of the SEC, FBI and the Seattle Chronicle contains over 2,000 documents, financial fraud, tax evasion, market manipulation, and perhaps most disturbingly, the systematic psychological abuse of Ethan Whitmore, orchestrated by his own mother to preserve control of a fortune built on lies. That was when Damian Whitmore, Margot's fixer cousin, stepped forward, his voice crisp with faux authority. These are wild accusations, he declared, from a disgruntled wife. If there were any truth to them, the Cascade Ridge acquisition, I interrupted, naming the headline-grabbing deal from the previous year, insider trading, based on information obtained through blackmail of an SEC official. My documents include the original communications, the payment trail to the shell company, and the exact trading patterns that followed. Damian's expression cracked just slightly. I didn't pause. Shall I also discuss the so-called charitable donation to Harborview Children's Hospital that was lauded across media outlets last fall? A few heads turned. 87% of those funds, I said, were funneled through 3-layered foundations, before landing in a Zurich account controlled by Margot Whitmore. I looked directly at her now. Account number 7719543332, opened under the name Eleanor Marin, your mother's maiden name. Gasps now, some subtle, some loud. Phones weren't just buzzing now, they were being passed between guests. The collapse was no longer a theory. It was happening, I continued relentlessly. The charitable donation to Harborview Children's Hospital last year, hailed in every local and national paper as a triumph of philanthropy. 87% of those funds were rerouted through 3 separate foundations, before landing in a Swiss account controlled by Margot Whitmore. I turned, meeting her eyes head-on. Account number 89477-21334412, opened under the name Eleanor Marin, your mother's maiden name. The precision of the detail landed like a sledgehammer. No one dared speak. Phones were no longer being used just to read alerts. Guests were searching public records, typing in account numbers, scrolling through breaking headlines that now bore Margot's face beside the word fraud. Still she tried. The strategist in her flipped tone instantly, pivoting to damage control. Claire has been under tremendous pressure, she began smoothly. She's been working long hours juggling sensitive cases. Ethan and I have both been concerned about her mental health for some time now. Gaslight, deflect, discredit. I tilted my head slightly. Shall we discuss the surveillance system you installed in our home under the guise of renovations? The murmurs sharpened. Or the sedatives you instructed your staff to slip into my evening tea when I worked late on cases that made you uncomfortable. I've had multiple blood tests, Margot, each one documented, each result time-stamped. Another ripple of horror across the room. And then came something unexpected. Recognition. In the eyes of many of the powerful women present, executive wives, former colleagues, even a state senator's partner, the calculated gaslighting they had lived it. I pivoted to Dr. Hale, who stood frozen, his composure withering. Hale has a decision to make tonight, I said loud enough for every phone to pick it up. The FBI has already received my data package. They will be particularly interested in your records, Doctor. Notes, communications, session transcripts. But, I let the moment strike. I'm prepared to recommend immunity, in exchange for your full testimony about the methods used, and who authorized them. His eyes widened. It was a lifeline, and he knew it. And the same offer applies to anyone else in this room, I added, addressing the entire roof. Those who step forward voluntarily will be treated very differently from those who wait for a subpoena. That was the final crack. The strategic fracturing of the Whitmore alliance began visibly. Pockets of guests turning toward each other in hushed urgent whisper. Phones passed between hands. Powerful people once bonded by silence were calculating their exit strategies. I turned. Ethan was looking up at me, and for the first time in years truly looking. His eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in months. Maybe long. The shock had disrupted the conditioning. How long have you known? He asked, voice quiet but real. 3 years, I said gently. At first it was just small things, inconsistencies. You'd come back from family meetings and behave like a stranger. Then the vacant spells got worse. The final piece was finding Hale's name on the payment records. He closed his eyes. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, I said. That's why I didn't walk away. Because I knew, you weren't the only victim. Across from us, Margot, seeing her empire collapse, made one last desperate lunge at the narrative. This is absurd, Ethan. Tell them this isn't real. But Ethan didn't look at her. He stared at the blood on my lip, and something shifted. His voice came back low, haunted. You did this to me. Margot blinked. Me, he repeated, louder now. All those sessions with Dr. Hale, the educational programs, the special protocols every summer. This isn't the first time you've made me. His voice broke. He couldn't finish. The weight of memory, now unfiltered, was suffocating. And then the elevator doors opened behind us. 2 men in dark suits stepped out with quiet authority. They scanned the scene with the cool detachment of professionals used to chaos. Perfect timing, I said softly, turning toward them. I believe a few people here would like to make some statements. I believe several people here are eager to make statements. The words hung in the air, but their meaning was already unfolding. Not just as data, not just as encrypted files sitting safely in a secure server, but as human truth laid bare across the rooftop of the glass house at Alki Point. Decades of manipulation, fraud, and coercive control unraveled in real time, thread by thread, gasp by gasp, and at the center stood Margot Whitmore, her empire crumbling, her veneer of perfection finally irreversibly shattered. The FBI agents moved with quiet efficiency, securing the exits, introducing themselves to the increasingly agitated guests. The crowd, once regal and composed, had begun to shift from stunned silence to a soft current of whispers, gasps, and tactical glances. Agent Nolan Price, whom I'd been feeding evidence to for nearly a year, gave me a discreet nod as he approached Margot. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, his tone calm but unmistakably final, we have a federal warrant to seize all electronic devices and documents in your possession. He handed her the paperwork. Her hand trembled slightly as she took it, eyes scanning the pages with the desperate energy of someone searching for an exit clause that didn't exist. When she found none, she turned to Damien, who was already 2 steps behind her, backing away, his expression unreadable, but his body language clear. He was done. The fixer had calculated his odds, and Margot was no longer part of the equation. This is absurd, she insisted, but the edge in her voice had dulled to panic masked as outrage. Do you know who I am, who we are? We do, Agent Price replied coolly. That's precisely why we're here. Around us, the rooftop, once an elegant birthday tableau, was unraveling into a scene of controlled chaos. Servers stood frozen, champagne bottles still in hand. Seattle's elite began to retreat in quiet panic. Judge Dean was already speaking into his phone, voice sharp with urgency. Senator Grant's wife tugged his sleeve, whispering frantically as they slipped toward the stairwell. The room fractured like shattered stained glass, and no one wanted to be left holding the most damning shards. Phones buzzed louder now. I caught glimpses of headlines. Breaking, Whitmore family under federal investigation, psychological conditioning, and financial crimes alleged. Seattle's golden dynasty implodes on camera. The Seattle Chronicle had moved faster than I expected, already publishing the first wave of documents I had leaked through encrypted channels. Margot tried once more, raising her voice to the scattering guests. This is all a terrible misunderstanding, a family dispute, twisted into something it isn't. Please don't jump to conclusions. I'm sure we can count on our friends to Margot. It was the police commissioner who just half an hour ago had been laughing at her jokes. I think it's best, he said flatly, if we speak tomorrow, through counsel. The abandonment had begun like rats peeling away from a sinking vessel. Those who had feasted off her power were now recalculating their own exposure. Nearby, Ethan had collapsed into a chair, his breath ragged, posture crumpling beneath the weight of something far heavier than shame. Truth. The walls built around his psyche were splintering, each memory emerging like a shard of ice beneath the surface. The summers at the lake house, he murmured, dazed. The special lessons with Dr. Hale. The headaches. Whenever I questioned family decisions, I approached carefully, not touching him, not yet. Despite everything, even the sting still pulsing across my cheek, I felt something more complicated than vindication, because Ethan had been both my tormentor and my fellow victim. Ethan, I said gently, kneeling beside him, keeping just enough distance. The conditioning is breaking down. It's going to be disorienting. His eyes found mine, really found mine, clearer than they had been in years. I hurt you, he whispered, and horror twisted across his face. He lifted his hand toward my lip, then hesitated. I would never, but I did. I remember now being told to respond. Triggers, commands. It wasn't you, I said, my voice steady. Not the real you. Margot's command tonight activated a reaction that was programmed, not chosen. Across the rooftop, Dr. Hale was already deep in conversation with the second FBI agent. His posture had shifted from cool detachment to frantic cooperation. I caught fragments following instructions, never saw the full plan. Doses were smaller than recommended. I didn't realize the extent. I turned back to Ethan. How much do you remember? His palms pressed against his temples, as if holding himself together. Fragments. Sessions in the study. At the lake house. Words repeated, over and over. Sedatives. Punishments if I resisted. His voice cracked. They've been doing this to me since I was 12. My own mother. My own family. The realization wasn't just painful, it was obliterating. His body curled inward, as if absorbing the blow from inside. Here, at last, was the real Ethan, not the puppet, not the heir, not the perfect product of Margot's psychological engineering. He was broken, but real. And then Margot moved. Despite the agent beside her, she stepped forward, voice raised with one last desperate gasp of control. Ethan, darling, don't listen to her. She's turned you against your family. After everything we've done for you. But I stepped in, voice cutting clean through the rooftop air. After everything you've done to him, you mean? I didn't raise my tone. I didn't need to. Would you like me to read from the session transcripts, Margot? The ones where you personally instructed Dr. Hale on which emotions to suppress in your son, which phrases to pair with compliance, which punishments to use when he disobeyed. And for the first time all night, Margot Whitmore flinched. The mask shattered, the monster behind it exposed. Ethan, darling, don't listen to her. Margot's voice cracked, high-pitched, brittle, a threadbare scream trying to pass for control. She's turned you against your family after everything we've done for you. After everything you've done to him, I corrected, rising to my full height as I faced her. The rooftop went still again. The evidence includes video recordings of conditioning sessions. I continued, Margot, sessions where you personally instructed Dr. Hale on which behaviors to suppress in your son. Margot's face contorted, her immaculate mask crumpling under the weight of exposed truth. Her composure, forged through decades of power and performance, collapsed all at once. He needed guidance, she said bitterly. Structure. The Whitmore legacy had to be protected from his weakness. There it was, the naked truth, no spin, no elegance, just the raw, monstrous calculation beneath her empire. Even the FBI agents paused, registering the moment the monster unmasked itself. Ethan stood shakily, the war inside him finally tipping toward clarity. My weakness, he said slowly, was wanting my own life. Each word gave him strength. Wanting to study literature instead of finance. Wanting to marry for love, not for strategic advantage. His eyes found mine. Was any of it real? He asked softly. Between us? Or was I just following another script? The question hit hard. Despite everything I'd uncovered, despite all the betrayal and lies, I couldn't bring myself to twist the knife. Because that question wasn't from the pup. It was from the man. The beginning was real, I said gently, before they intensified the conditioning. That's why I stayed. Because I saw glimpses of who you really were, and it was enough to know you were just as much a victim as anyone they've hurt. Outside, police lights splashed across the terrace, dancing over the glass and steel like reflections of a shattered crown. The harbor below shimmered with red and blue. More agents arrived, evidence response teams in navy jackets, walking with practiced precision. The collapse of the Whitmore dynasty was no longer metaphorical. It was procedural, it was public, it was final. Nearby, Margot Whitmore was being read her rights, her hands still free, but her freedom already gone. She stood tall out of habit, but there was no regality left, only a hollow shell echoing with the consequences of unchecked control. Damien was already speaking with federal agents, bartering the first phrases of self-preservation. His legal mind had flipped the switch, from defense to cooperation. Dr. Hale sat alone at the edge of the party's remnants, scribbling furiously into a notebook. Occasionally he glanced toward Ethan, not with malice or pride, but something closer to regret, and I stood at a crossroad. My vengeance was complete. I had burned the house down, not in rage but with meticulous surgical fire. The empire built on control, coercion, and cruelty was gone. The victims would see justice. The guilty would stand trial. I could walk away, let Ethan find his own road through the wreckage. But as I watched him confused, trembling, alive, I saw something familiar in him, the aftershock of breaking free from a life lived under false lights. I had spent 5 years in a dual existence, polished wife by day, covert investigator by night. We both had been shaped by their control, we both had survived it, and neither of us had come out whole. I can help you understand what they did, I said, surprising myself with the softness in my voice. I've documented the techniques, the triggers. It might help with your recovery. Ethan looked up, a dozen emotions crashing behind his eyes: shame, fear, grief, hope. After what I did to you, why would you help me? I touched my split lip, still stinging. Because unlike your family, I said quietly, I can tell the difference between the puppets and the puppeteers. Around us the Whitmore legacy fell like ash into the sea breeze. A dynasty once protected by fear, money and manipulation now surrendered to the light of truth. And in the midst of that chaos, gritty, raw, and irreversible, I made my choice. 6 months after my birthday celebration became a national headline, I sat quietly in the federal courthouse, watching Margot Whitmore enter the courtroom in handcuffs. Gone were the designer suits, the diamond pins, the surgically perfect image. In their place, a standard-issue prison jumpsuit, and the brittle kind of posture that comes from losing everything but pride. Still she held her chin high, refusing to acknowledge the sea of spectators who had gathered to witness the matriarch's fall. The courtroom was full, not just with journalists or government observers, but with those whose lives had been altered, broken or silenced by the Whitmore machine. Some I had discovered in old records, others who had stepped forward after the first round of exposés broke nationwide. Each person carried their own story of coercion, deception or quiet devastation, and today they carried dignity. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Masuda entered, not Judge Dean, who had recused himself immediately after my rooftop revelation. He was now under investigation for years of questionable rulings tied to the Whitmore influence network. The proceedings moved with the deliberate rhythm of justice, finally unbound. The prosecution's case, built from the digital skeletons I had unearthed and expanded by a full-scale federal investigation, was devastating in its clarity. Bank records, shell companies, witness testimony, psychological evaluations. The truth laid bare beneath the harsh fluorescence of the courtroom. Margot's legal defense had crumbled. Damien had turned state's witness almost instantly, abandoning family loyalty for personal immunity. The elite defense team initially retained had quietly withdrawn, one by one, as the breadth of Margot's crimes became too radioactive to defend. Now she sat next to a court-appointed attorney, whose eyes darted nervously through each page of evidence, clearly outmatched. During recess, Maura Tran, one of the forensic accountants assigned to the case, approached me near the courthouse atrium. We've traced over $480 million in misappropriated assets, she said softly. Your original estimate was conservative. I nodded. What about the trust? The interesting part, she replied. The original trust, Ethan's grandfathers had ethical oversight clauses that the family buried years ago. The court is considering reactivating those provisions to redirect the assets toward victim restitution. My chest tightened, but not with tension, with something dangerously close to hope. Justice, it turned out, wouldn't just mean punishment. It might also mean repair. The Whitmore fortune, once used to dominate and manipulate, could now fund healing for those it had wounded. Outside on the courthouse steps each afternoon, I met with former employees, partners, even estranged family members who had once been pushed out for questioning Margot's tactics. Each gave me a missing piece. Stories that reached back decades before I ever married into that dynasty. One of the most crucial voices came from Sophie Whitmore, Ethan's cousin, disinherited at 19 for refusing Margot's career path. She became one of my most valuable allies. They did it to all of us, she told me during a long strategy session. But Ethan, he got the worst of it. After his father died, Margot made him the mission. And indeed, the most damning blow to Margot's defense came from Dr. Leonard Hale. In exchange for immunity, he provided complete documentation of the conditioning protocols, psychological triggers, and Margot's handwritten instructions. The clinical coldness of his notes left no room for doubt. This was not miscommunication. This was calculated psychological abuse. Ethan, meanwhile, was absent from the courtroom, undergoing treatment at a specialized facility in Vancouver for victims of long-term psychological manipulation. His legal standing remained complicated, both perpetrator and victim, product of programming, catalyst for the collapse. The slap that had triggered the dominoes was now viewed through the lens of documented psychological control. I visited him once a month. Strictly professional, strictly informational, but honest. He had begun to emerge slowly, carefully from beneath the wreckage of who he had been told to be. One afternoon, we sat across from each other in the facility's garden. The first hints of spring were breaking through the soil, delicate, cautious. I don't know who I am, he confessed, staring at his hands. Without their directives, without the scripts, I don't even know what I like: food, music, opinions. He looked up. His voice wasn't shaky, it was quiet and real. I don't know how to be a person. That's actually progress, I said. The real you asks questions. The programmed one never did. He offered a faint smile. Not polished, not empty, genuine. I'm questioning everything. That's actually progress, I told him. The authentic self asks questions. The programmed self follows instructions. He managed a small smile. Genuine, not the polished, vacant version I'd grown so accustomed to during our marriage. You never stopped questioning, did you? Not my nature, I replied, watching him gently, honestly. Maybe that's why the conditioning never worked on me. What remained unspoken between us was the question neither of us had the strength, or maybe the desire, to answer. What now? The marriage had been a structure built on lies, manipulation and strategic design. Yet within the ruins there had been something real once. A flicker before the full machinery took over. Whether it could be recovered or should be was a question for another time. My own life had transformed entirely. I had resigned from Miller & Finch, unable to return to corporate defense after everything I'd learned, everything I'd felt. Power didn't just corrupt the weak, it hardened the privileged, it silenced the ethical. Instead, I founded the Cognitive Liberty Legal Foundation, focused solely on psychological manipulation, coercive control and financial exploitation. Our first clients were former Whitmore employees, people who had been forced to sign NDAs, threatened with litigation or manipulated into loyalty under duress. Within 3 months we'd expanded our reach, representing victims from other powerful families and corporations. The patterns were all too familiar. You've basically created a new legal discipline, my former mentor had remarked over coffee one afternoon. Psychological freedom as a civil right. He wasn't wrong. The foundation soon moved beyond litigation. We created educational programs for judges, law enforcement, and clinical therapists, helping them identify signs of psychological coercion. We partnered with cognitive liberty advocates, pushing for legislative reforms that redefined consent, manipulation and mental autonomy in court. And on the day Margot Whitmore was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison for fraud, racketeering and conspiracy, I sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, not in triumph, not in vengeance, but in peace. Justice had landed, the empire had fallen, and I had already moved forward. As the courtroom emptied, I turned to leave, but paused when I saw Ethan approaching. It was his first time attending a proceeding. He looked different, thinner, plain clothes, but his eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them, sad, focused. The trustees approved the restitution plan, he said without preamble. Everyone they harmed will receive compensation, including you. I didn't do this for money, I replied. I know. He hesitated, shifting his weight. That's why I asked them to direct my personal share to your foundation instead. It felt fitting, that what they used to control me should now help free others. I blinked, absorbing that, not just the gesture, but what it meant. It was a small act, but it was autonomous, unscripted. Thank you, I said simply. We stood there for a moment, two people changed by the same corruption, now charting different paths toward redemption. Your foundation's work, he began, pausing. I'd like to help. When I'm ready, my experience might be useful. It might, I agree. We didn't promise anything beyond that. No future, no expectations, just mutual clarity, hard-earned and unclouded by illusion. As we parted ways outside the courthouse, I understood something I hadn't been able to name before. The Whitmore saga, this 5-year unraveling, had never been just about exposing corruption, or even about justice. It was about something deeper, more vital. It was about reclaiming the right to your own mind, your truth, your identity, from those who would program human beings like software, erasing will, rewriting values, rerouting ambition. The road ahead would be long. There would be other institutions, other families, other power structures built on invisible control. But with each case, each client, each hard-won courtroom victory, I was building something that Margot Whitmore, for all her wealth and elegance, had never possessed, a legacy not of control, but of liberation, and that, I realized, was the most perfect form of justice of all.